I'm Jonathan Mason, and there is still a massive problem lurking today: the wage gap that is plaguing our society. Women are facing a problem that has been going on for hundreds of modern years. Their wages are not paid equal to men's. A stigma in a gender remains from 200 years ago, and it is dire to bring attention to it. The 1800 to 1850 England Industrial Revolution contributed to the wage gap through acts that segregated women from harsh labor jobs. They stripped their rights by grouping them with children and promoted cultural attitudes that prevented them from getting intellectual jobs. This video will cover writings, newspapers, and statements made by people living at the time. My goal is to get you immersed and be able to understand the thinking of the average person and why this problem still persists. The 19th century in England was a lot different than it is now. Workers' rights in general were pushed under the rug, women's were pushed a lot further. It is important to understand that this is not the exact point where this issue started, but it is an extremely influential time that contributed a lot to the wage gap between men and women. Women in England were not even allowed to obtain college degrees until 1880, when the University of London became the first to do so. This made it an unlevel playing field, as women were seen as uneducated in society and therefore would be limited to certain low-paying jobs. Women were thought to only be good at taking care of children at home, not working in harsh environments that were seen as dangerous for them with the men. This will cover instances where men refused the work of women in the first place, and why opportunities for promotion were slim as of no confidence from company workers. Women are not seen to be able to manage large roles in the workplace. Therefore, owners could get away with paying them very small amounts compared to men in their same position. Men would get promoted way more often than women, even when doing the same work in the same job. This pushed women to not want to work and instead stay at home, as they felt they started too far behind and it seemed impossible to succeed in such male-dominated fields. With all the background information out of the way, let's get into it. So, is the wage gap actually a real thing? Is it just something that's talked about? Well, yes, it is in fact real. So what were women exactly paid in the 19th century then? Women earned about 40% what men earned. For example, as a schoolmaster / schoolmistress job in the Parochial Charity School in Spitalfields in 1816, women on average made £38 per year, while men on average made £85 per year. A very large difference, and this quote from Joyce Burnett explains one of the reasons how this is possible. The assumption that women were unskilled was strong enough to lead to the relabeling of work done by women. 19th century England. Women are meant to be very modest and traditionalist. Samuel Beeton's English Woman's Domestic Magazine was a cheap magazine designed for middle-class women. It was very popular, and lots of women read and bought it. It told them what was fashionable and how they should dress. As you can see from this example, big, modest dresses were the fashion, covering their whole body besides their face. This was more than just a fashion statement at the time, and really taught women to be modest in all aspects of their life and not just clothing. Besides with other women, Beeton's pictures would often depict women with their children, picturing them as caretakers, and they were always with women and children, never in work clothes or working, or, most of the time, not with other men ever. This painted a society that did not fit women into being with men and working, and especially not dressing in something that would be worked in. The first law that I'd like to talk about is the Great Reform Bill of 1832. This bill redistributed voting seats and made it so more people could vote. Overall, this was a good thing for England, but it didn't include women at all, and the money requirement still needed to vote made it so most working class men were not able to vote still either. The big deal about this is that while a step in the right direction, if women were not included in these laws as workers or able to vote, how could society and the public consider them to be workers and do the same job as men if they're excluded in law and in voting? The next act, the Mines and Collieries Act of 1842, this again was a step in the right direction overall. It prevented children from under 10 from working in underground mines, as well as requirement and consistent checks on the working conditions. This act, however, ruled that women, no matter what age, could work in the underground mines, grouping 11-year-old boys over women and their ability to work. Grouping them with little children and putting their work ability as the same as them is very damaging. Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen is a great novel, and it highlights the issues and societal standing economically that women had at the time. The economic reliance on men being the most important one. Women were very economically vulnerable, as inheritance like estate were passed down to male heirs, and women relied on marriage for wealth. They had to keep a high reputation and character to have options for marriage. This meant acting very modestly and dressing how you should, trying not to stand out and look crazy to keep a high reputation. This relates to my wage gap problem because women were paid less than their male counterparts in labor jobs because they were seen as as more reliant on men and a less valuable of an asset. A great example of men refusing to work with women is the society not accepting it. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson was the first woman in England to qualify as a doctor. Soon after, the society changed their rules after facing massive backlash to make it so women cannot take and pass the test to become doctors. This is an example of even when an amazing woman overcome the odds and get a high-level job, it led to rule changes that hurt all women and destroyed their chances of becoming doctors. This is the part of gender segregation that companies would do, forcing women to work in tactile and home labor jobs instead of intellectual and harsh labor just because they were women and rules had to change. Henry Maudsley wrote a book, Sex and Mind and Education. Henry Maudsley was an influential psychiatrist who had multiple contributions to the Journal of Mental Science, and his essay on Edgar Allan Poe was very famous. He was taken very seriously. His book, Sex and Mind and Education, was damaging to the public's perception of women. He deemed the work of labor to be too damaging for women's minds, and that they were not fit or meant to do that kind of labor. Instead, they were built to foster children and teach them. This is the kind of reinforcement and the idea that keeps getting pushed and limits women, as the public's idea of becoming successful in a career outside of the household isn't possible for them and that they shouldn't do it. Men in this book are superior physically and intellectually, and it says that they should be doing all the jobs while women stay at home because they can simply not handle it. This issue still persists today. According to the Office for National Statistics of UK in 2024, the gender pay gap was 13.1% this year. Women are still making less than men in the same jobs. This is because stigmas and biases stick around for generations and is very hard to get rid of. The gender pay gap this year was highest in skilled trades and occupations that were the lowest in gender pay gap were things in caring and household services. This is the same as in the 19th century when women were meant to do those jobs and weren't allowed to do harsh labor jobs, and when they would get paid considerably less. In conclusion, while I said at the start that the Industrial Revolution was not the creator of the wage gap, the events that happened to it led to worsening the problem and creating agendas and perceptions around women that damaged the value of their labor and took opportunities from them. Whether that's by companies changing the rules to not allow women, the government initiating acts like the 1832 Mines and Collieries Act, or intellectual writing by people like Henry Maudsley that states that women cannot do harsher intellectual jobs, women are painted to only be capable of taking care of children and that they were children in harsh labor jobs, and that they were only meant to stay at home and take care of the children and the house, that their labor did not have value.